Okay, so the scene starts off with Omni-Man arriving on Earth in 1980, just like in the comics and show, and meets Cecil. After that, he would meet Debbie, and all the main stuff on how Omni-Man arrived on Earth would stay the same. In 1991, J.M. Micraw would arrive on Earth and form with N-Tech. N-Tech would be more of a government-funded project instead of a secret organization like it is in the show. And he would take up the name Jim McGrath, just like in the original show. Jim McGrath / J.M. Micraw, he'd go by as his hero name, would be the strongest hero at the time. And he'd explain that the Ultralinks are coming to Earth. Omni-Man, already knowing what the Ultralinks are, would be inclined to trust Jim, only because the Ultralinks can control his body and can control every object on Earth, including sound cannons, sound waves, all stuff like that can hurt the Viltrumite. And he prepares, so does Immortal, and most of the Guardians of the Globe, because I don't exactly know how many were around at the time. I know that Immortal was definitely there, though, and maybe War Woman. And Cecil also prepares and gets his team ready. So it is N-Tech, just like in the show. But unlike in the first Earth invasion, when it was just J.M. Micraw able to help, the aliens, aka the Ultralinks, have stuff designed to hurt Omni-Man, because in this universe, they go up against Viltrumites, are quote unquote one of the strongest creatures in the universe. So we have weaknesses built on their ships. Their cannons are vastly more superior. We have sonic cannons, blasters, and stuff that will hurt Viltrumites, and vastly more efficient tech than Earth. They obviously don't stand much a chance, but in Omni-Man's mind, he still needs to get this world ready for Viltrum's arrival. So, although he doesn't like Taconians or Ultralinks, he still has to help this planet, or else Viltrum loses a planet. So, he helps. At the battle, Jim and Omni-Man both go up to the ship, but Omni-Man gets hit by a sound cannon, which, as the Ultramites are weak to sound, he loses the ability to fly for a while. Jim, not knowing that Omni-Man could possibly withstand that fall, flies down as fast as he can, going Turbo Nova mode to save him. During that, he gets to him just in time, sets him down as gently as he can with the little time he has, and then goes into Turbo Rocket mode and flies off to go take down the ship. He then goes in Turbo Gauntlet mode. Wait, no, not Gauntlet mode. He then uses Steel to shoot down Steel and his shoulder cannons on rocket mode to shoot down the ship's jets, and then he goes for the main core, taking down the main pilot ship, just like in the original timeline he did. Although this time, with N-Tech having additional help from the GDA, they aren't as much of a loss as last time. So where for the fact the GDA has a lot of advanced tech, they were able to take down a couple more of the Ultralink easier than N-Tech could. And because of that, they know they at least have a chance of another invasion attacks better than they did in the show. They still have the safety measure in place and stuff, just like in the original timeline of Max Steel. In 1992, Jim would make public appearances because although in the show we're able to hide Jim relatively easily because Intech is more of a secret operation, unlike in this timeline. In this timeline, Hero is already, and the closest person that Jim would ever really talk to, because he's an alien, he doesn't really know a lot of things on Earth. He knows more than, say, Omni-Man does, but Omni-Man and Jim would become relatively good friends, only because they're both strong warriors. Omni-Man would show a tiny bit of sympathy, pretending to be more nicer, but yes, still. And eventually, Omni-Man would become more nicer to Jim, because Jim is also from Tachyon. He explains that the Ultralinks took over his planet. He's Velasticonian. He just wants to protect this planet from Makino. Omni-Man, knowing who Makino is, would agree, but in his mind, he doesn't really want to help Jim. Only reason why is because Jim would be able to stop his plans to conquer Earth, to make it the breeding ground for Viltrum. But he has to wait until the right time. In 1993, they'd probably fight a couple of the Elementors, just like in the original timeline. Omni-Man would be very able to take it down, most of them. Also in June 1993. By the way, there's not really a confirmed date on when Water Elementor arrives. I'm just gonna assume 1993 maybe. Only reason why is because in the original timeline, Forge seems to know about Water Elementor, although he doesn't assume that what was happening with the ocean was Water Elementor, but he somehow has the water hose against Max in the original timeline, which wouldn't really make a lot of sense unless he knew there was a Water Elementor out there. So I'm kind of making this what the year Water Elementor arrived up, but Water Elementor arrives in 1993. He would make his appearance. He would be able to beat a lot of the Guardians of the Globe. He'd fight the Muller twins, but then later, Jim realizes and also tells Cecil, GDA, and Intech that Makino will probably return. Although they have defenses to protect from Makino, that won't necessarily be enough. He knows Makino's stronger than just... all they've done is hold him off. They've not done anything that would really realistically hurt him. Jim then brings in Project Turbostar. He would show the designs to Cecil. Cecil would approve it, because logically he'd be able to approve this weapon and get more than just Jim and other scientists working on it. Jim would still have to do hero duties just like Max did. He would obviously be a little bit more careful than most heroes. He'd probably act a little bit more like how Immortal acted in the first episode of Invincible, and practically almost every hero in Invincible before. I don't know what I'm talking about that part, but Jim would be a protector. He'd be renowned. He'd probably be at the same popularity level as Omni-Man and Immortal. Maybe a tiny bit, maybe not as popular in that universe. Only because people don't really know much about him, besides just he's an alien from Tachyon. And in 1994, Cecil Stedman and the Turbostar would be complete. But Miles Dredd wants to make the siphoning device to siphon turbo energy. Omni-Man was able to overhear him thinking about it with his super hearing. He confronts Miles Dredd and says, and basically makes a secret alliance with Dredd and helps him get the parts he needs to siphon turbo energy. Omni-Man, knowing there's a weakness in the Turbo Star, being that the beam, if it's disrupted, it will explode. Omni-Man, hoping the explosion would kill Jim, bringing him back to the world's most popular hero, and being able to most likely take more logically control. He wouldn't have anyone to really be able to stop him, unlike if Jim was still alive, or teleported or whatever. No one really be able to stop Omni-Man, unless the Elementors, but the Elementors wouldn't really work with humans. If anything, if they let them out, then they'd be dooming themselves more than they'd be dooming them if they tried to just listen to Omni-Man. I know that Max was about barely a few months old when the Turbo Star was first launched. So I'm gonna still keep that relatively the same. But in early 1994, the Giant would appear, causing havoc on the city, just like he always does. The Guardians of the Globe would arrive. Jim would arrive, but he's not an official Guardian. He's more like Spider-Man is to the Avengers, where he's not really he's not really an Avenger, but he will help them every now and then. That's basically what Jim does. Jim uses his powers to help people. So when he sees that Giant is running loose, he decides to go into Sky Stinger mode and fly out and help. Jim quickly goes in Turbo Gauntlet mode, knocking Giant, not really knocking Giant out. That'd be a little bit far-fetched considering he didn't really do that to Mackinac. Gauntlet mode would make the Giant stumble. Omni-Man would give him an uppercut. Immortal would give him basically a downward uppercut. All the other Guardians would equally attack it. Omni-Man studying basically if Omni-Man's plan with Dredd fails, any weaknesses with Jim. Seeing Steel basically being the only weakness. Steel would logically becoming more of the planning person in this fight, would grab an electric rod, or he'd grab electricity and try to shock the Giant with no effect. So he then retaches the Jim, and they introduce a new mode Jim and Steel have been working on, Turbo Strength mode. They activate Turbo Strength mode for the first time in this universe, and they jump, punch Giant, and royally knock him out. He throws Immortal and Jim throws Immortal and Omni-Man both directly into the face of Giant, knocking the Giant out. Falling onto the ground, Jim then catches the Giant so it doesn't injure any civilians. Omni-Man and Immortal both would help. They would take him to a very large Intech stasis cell, or Cecil Stedman's prisons, wherever he sends them. And that's basically how that fight ends. But the key thing to figure out is Jim would be also talking to Immortal and Omni-Man, basically considering him to be friends. Jim would logically like Immortal a little bit more than Omni-Man, but Jim still thinks of Omni-Man as at least the friend he can talk to about stuff more like extraterrestrial like he is. He misses his home just like everyone else would. Omni-Man would also say things like he misses his home Viltrum. Jim would then say something to Omni-Man that kind of loosened Omni-Man's perspective on. See, Jim would already know what a Viltrumite is in this universe. He would know that Viltrumites are rude and conquerors. But Jim would say something, saying that Omni-Man doesn't really seem like that guy. Omni-Man seems like he's way nicer than any Viltrumite he's ever met. He's probably in this timeline definitely met a few on his way to Earth with Steel. Since his name is J.M. Micraw, and logically would be spread around the galaxy, Omni-Man probably knew who J.M. Micraw was, and Omni-Man would say, it's nice to at least meet someone who at least has his hero business better than most others. Jim would then go in Skystinger mode and leave, and Omni-Man would go back to his 7-year-old son, Mark, and Jim would go back to Molly, just like I said. That's how that chapter ends. In 1995, Max McGrath would be born, and would be the son of Jim and Molly. Omni-Man, being a little nervous, wondering if Max would have inherited Jim's powers of turbo energy. Omni-Man is basically praying that's not true, because if not, his plan to take out Jim would logically be in vain. And he'd have to deal with someone who might even be stronger than Jim was, logically, because Max seems to generate, if not as much of turbo energy as Jim, if not more, in the show. And if that happens, then obviously Omni-Man would not be able to conquer Earth like he's supposed to. And Mark has not shown any sign of his powers yet. So Omni-Man is still living like how he usually is. So over time, he would logically become more friends with Jim. Would kind of forget about his plan with Dredd, and therefore forgetting for the fact he's been giving parts to Dredd to make the siphoning device. And I think I would have to say they don't really give any concrete thing. I'd say maybe July 5th or July 9th would be the best day. Wait, no. Months. Say July 30th. He would be... the first test of a turbo star would commence. Jim would logically have to use his turbo energy to shoot it. Steel would lock in just like he did in the original timeline. But in Jim's testing, Dredd would appear. They wouldn't see him. Omni-Man would hear him, but knowing of this as part of his original plan to get rid of Jim, he wouldn't do anything. So in this timeline, when the turbo star would start to overload, would start to be basically draining Jim of more turbo energy, causing it to blow up. The turbo star pieces being scattered, Cecil and Forge would deem this project a failure, and Steel would go into stasis, getting rid of one of the most advanced organisms on the planet, Steel. Omni-Man does not smile. In fact, he looks a tiny bit sad in a way. Although, yes, Omni-Man knew this was his plan, taking away a child's father didn't necessarily feel the most right to him. But he had to complete his mission, so reality-wise, he wouldn't have cared as much as I'm describing it. There would be, because they thought Jim died, there would be a funeral for him, just like how the Guardians had the funeral for him when they were all dead. They would all say their thanks to Jim. But when Immortal popped up, he said, was a friend, a hero, and a protector. And a very smart man. Goodbye, my friend. Alright, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. I'm sorry if the mic quality was bad. I really don't have a headset or anything to do it besides for like VR. I'm kind of dumb to do that. Plus, I have to also edit for the Transformer series tomorrow. And yeah, huge shout out to Casual Prince for helping me get some facts about this video. And Random Draconian, I got some clips from there. And hope y'all enjoyed the video. This is also part 1 of this. What if? I would do more in the future. Bye, guys. Yep.